Get up in front of people, but just to tell you a little bit about myself, I started coaching small businesses and entrepreneurs about 2.5 years ago, and just recently I've really started concentrating and focusing on helping business owners and entrepreneurs find and liberate their creative genius, because I think that really is the secret sauce to what makes you stand out in the business place, in your world, in the relationships, whatever. But when you can tap into that, it can be one of your most powerful things. So this workshop, Creativity, your most powerful and personal tool for success, I'm hoping that you guys can walk away with some really great techniques and a little bit better understanding on what this thing is called creative genius. Now, I don't have a visual presentation, mainly because that's just a headache. Technology and I don't always get along, and if it will happen, if it can happen, it will happen. But what I have done is everybody has a few sheets of paper, and what I would like for you guys to do is doodle, take notes, draw pictures. I know my friend Patricia did this for the workshop before us, which is amazing, but there's a special connection that your head and your heart and your hand have, and when you put pen to paper, you remember things, you learn better, and you think bigger. So that's kind of a great introduction to what we're going to be doing today, is understanding how you can combine all these different elements and different exercises in order to expand your mind and your business and your ability to be more successful as a business owner. So first off, if y'all are open to it, I'd like to do a little brainstorm. So when I say creativity, what are some words that come to mind for you guys? Right brain. Expansion, right brain. Y'all can keep them coming, all right, as fast as I can. Imagination.
Art.
Artistic.
Out of the box.
Out of the box.
Forward thinking.
Fun.
Fun, yes, I love it. I missed one. What was the other one?
Forward thinking.
Forward thinking. All right, those are just a few things.
Whiteboard.
Whiteboard. Blank slate, right? Whiteboard. All right, the other thing, I love that you have such a wonderful connection to the word artistic, because growing up I heard a lot of starving artist, daydreamer, flibberty-gibbet, you name it. Whenever you said art, it depicted almost a negative connotation, at least when I was growing up. So here are some words about creative. So if I ask you who are some creative geniuses, what comes to mind?
Prince.
Prince. Oh, yes. Prince. Who else? Einstein? Is that what somebody said? Yeah? Van Gogh. Yeah.
Leonardo da Vinci.
All right, yeah.
Michelangelo.
Oh, the Star Wars dude.
Da Vinci, Star Wars,
George Lucas.
Gates, yeah. Lucas. I sometimes think of people like Maya Angelou. I think she is a, and then don't forget Kanye.
Never forget.
I'm kidding. But anyway, so here are some people that we all remember as being creative geniuses. What are some adjectives to describe them?
Passionate.
Passionate,
Driven.
driven,
Dedicated. Eccentric.
eccentric,
Unique.
unique,
Rule breakers.
rule breakers. Anything else?
Original.
Original. It's interesting when you combine these two lists, because we think of creativity one way, but yet we label creative genius another way. So what would happen if we combine the two? Because that's really what these people have done. Now, when these people were starting and They had all these wacky, crazy, original, eccentric ideas. What do people say about them?
Crazy.
They were crazy. They were crazy, right? They were just dreamers. They couldn't think of anything, valuable to do, so they just make up stuff. But in hindsight, what do we know about them now? They were amazing thinkers. Their creativity and their desire to do something that hadn't been done before kept them passionate and driven. So how can this apply to business owners? I truly believe that everyone has a creative genius. Everyone. You may not know where it is. You may not know. It may be buried deep down into perfectionism and not good enough and a lot of fear and a lot of things like that. But everyone has a creative genius. And I feel like my job here is to help you find it. Because I believe that that's where your happiness lies, that's where your success lies, and that's where you do your most important work. So Einstein said we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. It's interesting, I noticed that the person before me said the same thing. In order to do what we get what we never had, we have to do something we've never done. Okay. So I did some Googling, ironically, about being open and figuring out what was really, really important to people like this. What were the top characteristics and traits of people who are considered creative genius? And the biggest standout for all of these was an openness and a curiosity. So openness to different things, non-judgment. Why is the sky blue? Why are plants green? Why do some things grow and some things don't? Why do some cars go faster? Those sort of things. This curiosity of everything around us. So what happens when we start looking at our world without judgment and with openness and curiosity? Can y'all think of anything that might happen?
New ideas or new thoughts.
Yeah. I like to say it's endless possibilities. Endless possibilities. And that goes with work, that goes with kids, that goes with relationships, it goes with the amount of money that is available out there, the amount of clients that are out there for you. Possibilities are endless. So here's a couple of things to think about, because I've seen this a lot in myself, I see it a lot in my clients, but a lot of times we think we know what people want, or we think we know how the best way is to do business. But what happens when we make these assumptions is that we put ourselves and others in a box, and that box is constricting. And if we limit our thinking, we limit our choices. So what it is the openness allows us to tolerate differences of opinion. It allows us to talk, this is my favorite, it allows us to tolerate the unknown. How many people completely get paralyzed by the unknown? Yes. Yeah. And business owners especially. If I do this, this might happen. Well, yeah, if you do this, that might happen too, right? But we all, for some reason, I think it's just human nature, we're always going to default to the negative things to come. Even though chances are it's 50-50. Because it is our nature to protect ourselves. It's in our nature to survive. So we always are scared to take that next step. And a lot of that actually was put on us as kids in a very loving, caring way. Don't cross the street. You'll get run over, right? All these things were put there to protect us. But now we're older, we don't need that anymore. We're grown up. We know to look when we cross the street. We don't just not ever cross the street, right? So the other thing that non-judgment does, and this has become very personal in my own life, is it fosters independence. If you are willing to take in data, whether it be neither positive or negative or just neutral, you become clearer on who you are, what you want, and where you're going. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes we like that. So when you're an independent person, you're going to rely less on what your competition is doing. You're going to rely less on, ooh, what's the trend right now? You're going to start relying more on what does my heart say is right for me. Now, a lot of you may be asking, what does this have to do with creativity? I'll get there. I'm actually going to read y'all a story because it's one of my favorite things I've ever read. I'm a big book nerd. I like history, and I read this trilogy on the history of Jews in America, which was actually fascinating about from the beginning to the end, not the end, till now. Oh my gosh. So this is an interesting business story. So back in the 17 and 1800s, copper was considered a poor man's metal, right? So only the cheapest utensils were used, only the smallest quantities of monetary coins were made out of copper. And then something happened in the 1870s. Does anybody remember what happened in the 1870s? Electricity, the telegraph. All of a sudden, you couldn't get enough copper, right? Everybody wanted copper. It was, and so they were mining the crud out of copper all over the world. But when they mined the copper to get the high grade A copper, there was all this slag of low quality ore that was lying around. Well, Adolf Lewison was like, how can I do something with this stuff? So Adolf Lewison started as a bristle brush salesman. And he used to go around town to town to town and sell little copper bristle brushes. And after he'd been in business a while, he and his brothers went in together and they started ordering ingots of copper and melting their own stuff down so they could make their own and manufacture their own bristle brushes. So he was able to make a little bit of money on his own. Well, what happened is there was a glut on copper because everyone started mining copper. And they couldn't even get rid of it in the States, so they started shipping it over to England. And it was actually cheaper to pay the shipping to ship it somewhere else than try to sell it or keep it or store it here in the U.S. So what happened, stay with me, it gets better. So what happened is the very next year, all of a sudden, there was a copper shortage. So all the U.S. copper was now in Europe and England, sitting in storehouses or warehouses. So they decided, let's bring it back. So we'll have it shipped back, and then we can sell it for top dollar. Well, there was a loophole that if you were shipping out of the country, it's like a 50 cent per pound tax, I think, or 50 cent per pound duty going out. But if you brought it back in the original cast with its original certifications, then you didn't have to pay to re-import it. So basically, they could have gotten it back for a lot cheaper. So what the Lewison brothers had done is they were like, you know what, our copper's out of its casks. Don't have any more certifications. It's already been removed or everything, but I bet you, in the grand scheme of things, we can ship that stuff back, and the ingots that are stamped made in America, that would be enough of a proof that it was actually made in America to bypass customs. Well, that hunch proved correct. So now they had all their copper back and made a ton of money. He took that money, he bought a copper mine out in Butte, Montana. And sorry. And so the thing is, though, is he had this copper mine, and the only way to get the copper out was by pack mule and mule train, which was just not, it was cost prohibitive. So he contacted the Northern Pacific Railroad and said, hey, can you build a train track from Helena to Butte and for whatever? And the guy was like, yeah, I'll do that, but what this means is you have to have a certain tonnage used on my rail every year, or you have to pay like the maximum dues. And so he's like, okay. So basically he had to have lots of shipments, heavy cargo, which he really couldn't guarantee. He was like just flying by the seat of his pants. Then he contacted the Central Pacific. There's another railroad that basically what happened is they have a railroad that met here, and Butte, Montana was here. So he had somebody build a train here and somebody build the train track here, and so he smelted all the copper here in this town. Well, the funny thing about that is there was this low-grade ore lying around from all these different mines that nobody wanted. And so he goes, I wonder if I took this low-grade ore and just put it on my train cars, that would be the weight that I needed to please this guy. I'm going to have it, and I'm going to ship it all the way to the West Coast, and then I'm going to lease it to the shipping industry to, this is crazy, cracks me up. I'm going to lease it to the shipping industry as weight and ballast for the boats. So he basically put the low-grade ore on the boats for free. It goes all the way down Cape Horn, comes back around to New York. He sells it again as ballast to another group of shipping people, and those ores go to England. So nobody wanted this stuff. It was just trash to the Vanderbilts and the Schiffs and the Slegmans and all these people that were huge giants of the railroad industry. Didn't want anything to do with the crap. They only wanted the top tier, they only wanted the good stuff. It just wasn't even worth their time. So he was able to not get paid once, but twice for shipping the ore as ballast. And then he sold the ore in England because they had a shortage because of copper mining. I don't know if anybody, you know what Coal Dark, anybody ever heard it? Basically the copper mine industry in England, they had to start drilling deeper and deeper and it got harder and harder and more expensive to get copper. So they were having to import all their copper from outside. So this is a guy that bought a mine he couldn't use, built 2 railroads that he couldn't really supply, and managed to get ore that he didn't mine, he didn't pay for, and he sold it twice. So the thing I love about this is most people would have quit. Most people would have said, you know what, I'm just going to eat that and walk away. I bet you even some of those big railroad tycoons would have just said, you know what, we're just going to write that off. But what I love about this story is that he was creative. He was a financial genius. He was creative about solving problems. And the other thing is he had an openness doing things a different way. There was a copper mine outside of Salt Lake City that Mormons didn't even want to use because it wasn't worth their time to mine. I mean, that tells you how much people just completely turn a blind eye to all these different things were right in front of them because all they could think about is, got to make that big money right now the way all the big guys do it. So, I know that was a long story, but I laughed to myself when I read that because I'm like, who does that? You have to realize back then, there were like you'd have like 10 railroads going like a mile apart going to the same city because there was no regulation. You know, you had 5 different railroad lines, and sometimes people owned 2 miles of track between 2, and you had to pay a fine or a tax just to cross that 2 miles of track. It was crazy. So there were people who thought creatively to get around those things. Another story I have, we're talking about not being open and not judgmental. Here's what not to do. I had a one-on-one the other day with a gentleman. I was going to be doing business consulting with him. And super nice guy, big guy, big buckle, starch pants, and in my head I'm thinking, he's just a good old boy, nice guy, whatever. And I'm talking to him, and we're talking about what I do for my business, how I do it for his business. And I said, and don't worry, I'm not going to do any of that woo-woo stuff. Because I know that I'm a coach, but I'm not going to read your chakras, I'm not going to do that. And he goes, oh, I kind of like that stuff. Needless to say, I didn't get him as a client. So these are the kind of things I'm telling you about. Don't make these assumptions. I needed to ask more questions. I should have said, how would you like to be coached? What are some of the methods that you like? But I will tell you, being someone who's very creative and spiritual in the business world can be a really hard tightrope to walk. Does anybody have a creative soul but is also a business person? Yeah. It can make it very difficult. So that's the number 1. Being open and curious and not judgmental. I know it sounds like 3 things. So secondly, I love this, and it's something I think we can all, the other trait of creative geniuses is that they don't care what anybody else thinks. They really don't. They blaze their own trail, and they stick to their independent thought. And they do this in a couple of ways. The first one is, now I know you hold still, they worry less about the how-to, and then they concentrate on the what-if. So how many people in here, when they first started their business, Googled, YouTubed, workshopped their way into complete confusion about how to build a website, how to build a business, how to get clients, how to keep clients, how to do social media, why is social media important? Yeah, because there's so much information out there. And a lot of it's fantastic information, but what has happened is we actually have two things going on here. If we are in the middle of consuming information, guess what we can't do?
Use
What they
it.
want.
Huh?
Execute. Use
You
it.
can't, yeah. But the one thing we can't do if we're consuming information, we can't create. We cannot. The executive function is completely different in our brain than the creative function. So if all we're doing is getting and trying to absorb all this stuff that somebody's done before, they know how to do it, they're the best. What also comes up when you're looking at the best?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Limitations.
Limit, exactly. Judgment. You know, why is something the best? Who decides that? Who certifies the certifiers, guys? Have you ever thought that?
Yes.
Oh my God. I'll be honest with you, I love knowledge, but I've met some of the stupidest doctors and doctorates in my life. And that's not a judgment, it's just that if there's been 20 years of their life consuming information, guess what they have not done? They haven't done anything, they haven't created anything. All they've done is memorized. And that means and the deal is that's why a lot of people stay in academia. Because getting out in the real world is scary as hell. I have postdoctorate friends that it's not a pretty world. It really isn't. Because they're holding on so tight to their position in the academia, because if they were to have to go out and get a job, oh my gosh. Now that's not to say that you can't get an education and learn and stuff, but there's a difference between being certified and knowing what to do. So the other thing I want to is, if we're Googling how to do business in the best way, we're going straight back to this. If you want to get something different, you're going to have to do it different. If you want business as usual, then Google how to do business as usual. If you want to be a disruptor, then you have to tunnel in. You have to get it from here. So if you think about in your search for a fast answer, you're bypassing all of this amazing inner wisdom and intuition. Cece has seen me grapple in our mastermind group with my messaging. And I realized the reason I couldn't find my messaging among all of these programs and workshops, they weren't my people. And their messaging is not my messaging, nor will it ever be. And it's interesting to try to describe what your unique messaging is to marketing people who want to be able to market to the masses. Because one of the things I do is I want to work with a specific type of person. I don't want to work with everyone. Who here wants to work with everybody on the whole planet? Right? Right. There's a time in our life when we're hungry and we're like, okay, yeah, anyone that's breathing has blood, I'm willing to take money from. But you know what that does? That just leaves us mediocre. So when we really start building this red rope around our business about not only do I want to work with these kind of people, this is the only type of work I want to do. And what that does, it builds in exclusivity. Who has ever heard that if you are competing on price It's a losing battle. So what do you think is going to combat competing for price?
Service.
Uniqueness.
Uniqueness. Quality. Right. So it hurts when I'm talking to clients and they're like, well, such and such is cheaper than me. I'm like, I don't care. You know, I don't care. Because if you start competing on price, you're already losing. Because there will always be somebody who's hungrier and more afraid and willing to drop their prices. And that's not what you want to show up as. So if we take that information, here we are, we're going to start using our own imagination, we're going to start taking our own journey, we're going to start tapping into our own uniqueness. One of the things that we have to uncover is our own intuitive wisdom. So I look at creativity and intuition as like the Hollywood power couple. So I call it create-tuition because they really are intertwined because they do work in the same fashion when it comes to our decision making and some of the different brain areas, which I won't get into too much. But the way I look at it is if you start freeing yourself from the judgment and the curiosity, you start tapping into your creativity, then your natural intuition is just going to happen. It's a natural progression. Once you start releasing all of the assumptions and the judgment, you're going to find that your intuition and your intuitive gut feelings are stronger, and they're going to be your best friend. So sometimes people think, what do you guys think of when you think of intuition?
Gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Just trusting your gut.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always that first mind. My first mind said,
Yes. Yes. And there's something to that.
yes.
Yeah. Intuition is not a figment of our imagination. It's not. It's a real thing. And what it is it's actually the result of 3 different activities going on in our brain. And I'm going to make sure I get these right because so it comes from your right hemisphere, which governs your creative thought and emotion, that sort of thing. It also activates your cerebral cortex or your cerebellum, which actually was the very last part of our brain to be evolved. It's specific to the human creatures that we are. So the cerebellum is responsible for decision making, creativity, and cognitive thought. So this whole thing is we look at something and we process it. We see something familiar, we process it. And specifically, it's called the Ventromedial Prefrontal Cortex. That's a mouthful. It's where we store our memories of rewards and punishments. So you can see how these 3 pieces, okay, first of all, here's my emotion. Second of all, here's how I intake information. And third is, here's how it hurt last time. So all 3 of these things work together for us to get our gut feeling. A lot of people think that actually intuition is actually called condensed, let me make sure this is right, condensed reasoning or swift cognition. It's our brain takes in information so quickly that we will pull all this information, we will access files in our brain, and we come up with a decision. Usually it's our first decision or our first instinct because our brain has all that knowledge already, that data. Now, we may not be able to access it consciously, but subconsciously our brain still have all of that information. Are y'all following me? Okay. Because I know sometimes I ramble. So I want to read this. Let's see. So when you're given a situation, your brain conducts a brief search of the existing files. That's the way they look at it. And then they go to the best solution based on the information at hand. But this process actually gets better with time. So it's not something that just is always great. You actually have to use it and practice it. And there are a lot of scientists out there that say usually your intuition is the right way to go. Do you guys know who Malcolm Gladwell is? Who wrote The Tipping Point? Okay. He wrote a book called Blink. And I think the subtitle is The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. And he's a huge proponent for this instinctive thing. Now, he's gotten a little bit of backlash about it because I guess people misinterpreted what he said as, you just do everything with your instinct. And that's not really what he said. I mean, he's among a lot of things. What he mainly said is, your intuition is going to be your best friend, specifically in a few categories. And as business people, this is the things I find that are interesting. So one of the categories that you are going to want to use your swift cognition in is something you specialize in, because you've got a lot of information stored. So if you're a doctor and a patient comes in and looks kind of pale and anemic, well, probably you're thinking, I'm going to check for anemia right off, right? Now, if you're just some Joe Blow who's never seen someone, you're not going to just assume that, unless you're my mother. She's not a doctor, but she plays one in my house. So these are the kind of things. So if you specialize in something, don't be afraid to use your gut instinct, because odds are that you're right. Secondly, he talks about if you think you need a special opinion. So earlier when I said something about talking to marketing people, whatever, if you don't have a clue what you're doing in a certain area, don't be afraid to reach out and ask. But always run it through your filter. Because just because somebody says this is the best way to do it, doesn't necessarily mean it is. And the third thing he says is, which I think Jeff's probably going to have a heart attack, big money investments. But he said basically when people buy a house or a car, they're doing it on emotion. And however you feel about that, he says basically when people have made those decisions based on emotions, they're actually happier. So whether they were the right choice or the wrong choice, they did it because that's what they wanted, and then in the long run they don't regret it. It's kind of hinky, but I mean, I can see that. I mean, realtors and car people always say it's an emotional buy. And it is an emotional buy. But what's wrong with that? Nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have the money, it's what you want. So, the other thing is, what I love about intuition is it helps you break through this paralysis by analysis. If you're constantly Googling and searching and comparing and doing Excel spreadsheets, and whatever, eventually what you've done is you've paralyzed the communication between the two parts of your brain who are your best friend. Because if you are so busy analyzing, then you're blocking your intuition. And your intuition isn't some magic little secret potion. It's there for a reason. So now that we can combine the openness, the non-judgment, curiosity, and we've tapped into our intuition and not giving a crap what anybody else thinks, guess what happens? We're more productive! Yay, we're more productive. We are not wasting time Googling and searching and YouTubing a how-to. We're not wasting time trying to wrap our head around why such and such said something about my business. We're not wasting our time trying to decide how to read our client, because we're asking the questions. The other thing, which is also fun, is you're more motivated. And there's a really interesting scientific piece to this. So when you're open and curious, your dopamine levels are higher. And dopamine, I don't know if you guys know what this neurotransmitter does, but it basically wants you to want something. It's a desire neurotransmitter. So if you are open to something and you have desire to do it, guess what you're going to do? You're going to want to do it. You're going to stop procrastinating. You're going to be passionate and driven. And I get it. The struggle is real with procrastination. And I also think, fear is a big factor there. But I think with practice, like I said, with practice, these things can be smoothed off and leveled out. And you will also become very aware of when it's happening. Instead of just kind of drowning in a sea of emotions, you don't know what to call it. I'm spiraling. But you become aware of what you want. You'll want to get it because your dopamine levels are off the charts. And you won't do anything. Nothing will stop you. Which there's a difference between that scenario and somebody saying, yeah, I'm an accountant. Well, I mean, really, it's not that there's anything wrong with being an accountant, but if you're not living the fullest expression of who you are and tapping into that genius that does all these amazing things for you, then you're probably going to be bored and burned out. So tapping into your creativity, being more open, being less judgmental, it prevents burnout, it prevents procrastination, it keeps you motivated, it keeps you happy. So, interesting, we've kind of talked about creativity a little bit, but I haven't talked about how. Well, before we can talk about how, we need to talk about when. Who's making time? Who's making time to do the things that open them up? I can't tell you how many. That's awesome, yeah. But you probably found that the importance of that and how.
Well, I'm worried there's a cost to it. Am I worried like, oh my gosh, I can't schedule work this day because I've decided.
Yeah.
That's where my fight.
Well, the nice thing about it, we've already freed up your time and you're already more motivated. So it's just a matter of making space for it. I call it put yourself on a calendar diet. Because here's the deal. When you're intuitive and creative and you're starting these practices of being more open, it helps you tap into your superpower. And why would you limit yourself to 15 busy appointments in a row when it could be that you could have 2 amazing clients if you just spend a little time figuring it out? I can't tell you how many people I've heard saying, so busy working in my business, I can't work on my business. That's my invitation of business owners. I don't know. But who feels that way? Because we're just busy. I've been that. I'm guilty of that. I'm like, look at my calendar and it's bleeding. There's no space. But you got to make the space. The other thing that creative geniuses do, they make time. They make the space. Their life is inserted with creative rituals. And those creative rituals could be doodling, they could be drawing, they could be gardening. Anything that removes you from your head and gets you in the zone where you can be an observer and a participant at the same time. And you're not just looking and judging, and this is right, this is wrong. It strips away the fear and the doubt and the limited thoughts. So you have to make the time. I lost all of y'all. I know you're thinking, how can I make the time? Could I move this around? It doesn't have to be a long time. It could be 10 minutes. I have friends that journal every night for 10 minutes before they go to bed. They doodle, they draw, they data dump, whatever. But it's basically taking all of the analytical detritus in your brain and just dumping it on paper. It's getting out of your own head and overthinking everything and just doing the gardening. You guys, yesterday I had this workshop to work on. Guess what I was doing? I was pulling weeds. But you know what? It looked like I was avoiding work, but what I was doing while I was pulling weeds was thinking. I was writing, I was creating. I kept my hands busy. I'm one of those people who can't just sit, and my meditation is through movement and action and mindless weed pulling. And so my challenge to you guys is to begin inserting a creative ritual in your life. Do y'all know what that means? It could be doodling, it could be meditation. You know, I have some friends that they meditate on a different intention every day. And they spend like 10 minutes and they just sit with that intention of what they want to focus on that day. And they release everything else. And what that does is it frees up that space in your brain where other other wonderful creative thoughts can come in. It doesn't take money. It takes no money and very little time. So why do we not do it? Fear? I have Patricia who does this over here. She's one of the amazing artists. I have lots of amazing artist friends. I have an artistic family. You put a pen in my hand and I'm like, I can sew you a house. I can do graphic design, but if you put a pen or a pencil or a paintbrush in my hand, I freeze up because it's just not my thing. So I don't want you to think you have to be, Van Gogh or a sculptor or whatever. Creativity is just that place where you find flow. It could be writing, it could be singing, it could be dancing, it could be trimming up a bonsai tree. Because creativity is not a destination, it's a journey. So some of the things that, I've got some really great, I actually looked some of these up because I ran out of ideas by this last page. So, and you know what, that's okay, because I had done all I needed to do. My creativity had taken me where it needed to take me. And then I decided, okay, it's someone else's turn to pinch hit. So I came across this great article about all these different things you can do. Now, some of you have been in my improv leadership workshop where we talk about improv is another great way to tap into that creative energy and that non-judgment. Is look up 3 random words in the dictionary and then write a story using all 3 of those words. It takes like 5 minutes, right? Get a pen and paper and just doodle. I encourage you guys to doodle in a meeting or anything because you retain more. I mean, there's been scientific studies about people who doodle. They remember more because they're connecting the emotional and the executive function at the same time when they're listening. It's one of the few times, and I think walking is the other time. Walking and doodling are the 2 times that you can incorporate executive function and your emotional connection. You can take your favorite song and make up new lyrics. I used to date a boy in college that did that and drove me absolutely crazy because he only made up dirty lyrics. I don't know why. We didn't date very long. But maybe he was a creative genius and I just didn't recognize him. So if you can get away from your office, if you can't get away from your office, draw something on your desk. Draw your tape dispenser or draw something. Maybe draw something on your desk, but don't look at your hand when you draw. Because if we do more exercises that take us out of that space of judgment, like I'll start drawing and I'm like, oh, that's terrible, erase, erase, oh, that's terrible. So if I knew that it didn't matter what it looked like when I was done, it makes it a lot easier. A lot of my clients who struggle with doing their content on their website, I tell them, write it like no one's going to read it, and write it like you didn't write. And it frees yourself up from the fear and the judgment and the, what are people going to think, and does this sound too braggy, or what? So what? It doesn't matter. No one's going to read it because you can go back and edit it. This one is fun. I have never heard of this one, and I thought this is if you mash up new technology with old technology and see what you can come up with. So they had given some examples like Uber and horse carts. So that made me, so you think about it, like the Apple Watch and a sundial, or because it's taking us out of what we think we know and letting our creative genius tell us what we might know that we're not seeing. But journaling, meditating is a good one. Interestingly enough, Maya Angelou kept a separate hotel room that she did just for working. She'd go there just for working. She worked there every day from 8 to 2. I think it was 8 to 2. And she would stay there and focus on work. Sometimes it never came, and sometimes it did. But she allowed herself to leave at 2, even if she'd never done anything guilt-free. Sometimes she stayed later because, it was flowing, it was going. But it's these rituals that we set ourselves up for in order to be able to create something amazing. I don't know if any of you have ever read The War of Art. Not The Art of War, but The War of Art. He talks a lot about when things you're the most resistant against, that's when they're the most important work for you. So next time you find yourself really coming up against those walls, okay, you think, okay, what is it about this situation that I really need to focus on? And he also mentioned pray. He said once he pay homage to his muses. So every day he would go in his office and he would sit down in front of his paper and he would talk to his muses, his angels or whatever, and ask them to be with him while he wrote. It was his ritual. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can pray, you can sing, you can shower, whatever is your ritual where you do these activities, but they are important. Make space for it. Because if you're filling up your schedule with menial busyness and you're too busy to work on your business, then maybe you're just doing business as usual instead of being business as unusual, which is what you want to do. So I personally go out to my patio and listen to the birds and my water fountain, and I just start thinking about all the different things that have happened the week, and I start tying and pulling the threads from the different things, and I create content from that. Because every time I pull content from someone else, it just doesn't feel right.
Oh, yeah. If you can't think of anything to do, take a peanut butter jar that's empty and put peanut on the inside of it, peanut butter, and throw it in the backyard. The squirrels love it. It is absolutely freaking hilarious.
That's awesome.
Oh, I have video.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's blissfully happy. I mean, wherever you can get in your flow. So, does anybody have any questions?
So I'm going back to that no assumption where that if you told the guy I don't do woo-woo and he didn't hire you. To me that sounds awesome. It's like if someone wants something and I don't do it because I've decided no. I don't know. Does it depend on if it's a win for you or if it feels
it does. Well, and I'll be honest with you, I do woo-woo.
Oh, you do?
But I don't usually mix with business and woo-woo. I would have been willing, but he came to me to talk about his business. And like I said, that was a snafu from stem to stern on my part. And that's okay, though, because I look at it as there's a reason I'm not working with him. I'm okay with that.
I guess, to me that kind of went with don't take someone that just breathes.
Well, exactly. But that has happened. I've had clients when I first started out that I thought, how do I get rid of them? And it's funny because it's not about them, it's that I don't think I can help them. It really, that was not a judgment from them. It was like, I just don't think that I can help them.
So the more was like you were limiting yourself, it may have been fun to do woo-woo.
Yeah, I would have totally done woo with him. That's so yeah.
Well, I use the word
Yeah.
woo-woo. So I know.
Right. A lot of that seems to be like the go-to word, Here's the deal. I'm a life coach, but being a certified coach, I can coach anybody. It's just whatever specialty I have. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, you're that creativity coach." I'm like, not really, because I'm not going to take you to a retreat. We're not going to paint and rub ourselves in finger paint. It's not going to happen that way. But I believe in the superpower that every one of us have that is our creative genius. And it's just us tapping into that. And I think Jeff is a great example. Can I use you as an example?
Do I have a choice?
You just say no, I didn't sign a waiver, Jeff has always got something going on. Because he is limitless in his thinking. Now, does everything he does work out?
God, no.
No. But one of the other traits of creative geniuses is they fail well, and they just keep trying. Yeah.
I think prolific would be a good descriptive word for you. It's just, if you keep putting that out there, things are going to stick to the wall. And you've had a lot of great things stick to the wall.
If you put one thing out and you fail, then oops. If you put lots of them out, you got a better chance of actually some of them working out.
But I just
Exactly.
wanted to share with you that the biggest sticking point for me, and I'm working on overcoming this, so some of these rituals you're talking about I think are going to be helpful, is everything I think about creatively, there's this automatic voice in my head that says, yes, but is this practical? Will this produce well, can you sell this? Can you
Yeah.
use it to improve somebody's life? Can you? And I'm like, shut up. But I can't seem to get it to shut up. There's this.
Well, maybe you're not asking the right questions.
Yeah, I don't know.
So what if something like that comes up, and instead of worrying, okay, can I make money? It's like, how does this tap into me being the fullest expression of myself every day? And if it doesn't,
The ultimate goal.
exactly. Because you know people who make a ton of money and are successful and everybody likes? People who show up just the way they are.
Because the truth is, if it helps you at all, it helps everybody you work with.
Yeah.
And I'm working through that, but it's still that ingrainedness, the very first thing. And so I'm working on, I'm going, no.
Oh, I still hear about how you gonna make money with that. I mean, I told you that my family is a family of artists. My sister and my mother both have a BFA in art. And my sister has always kind of carried this, mantle that she's an artist, so no one understands her. She's an artist, so no one will hire her. She's an artist, so she can't possibly be taken seriously. And you know what? She's right. If she's thinking that way and she's putting it out there, then that's exactly what she's getting. I'm wackadoodle, right? I say weird things come up, they come out. I have a head and mouth edit disorder. But if I was to stop that flow, I would stop being me. And I may say the wrong thing, but my heart is always in the right place. And if people don't know that or don't get, I'm always the first one to apologize. So, but really, this piece, this creativity piece, this being open to whatever kind of comes up for us, is huge in the business world. If you want to get far in this business, you have to be a disruptor. You have to be. Do you really think you're going to get successful by doing the ABC of social media just like everyone else? You might, but you got to show up in that content as who you are. I mean, Andrea, how many fitness people are out there in the world today?
Tons.
How do you stand out? You have to be different. You have to be passionate. And it doesn't even be different, but you have to be doing something you love, that people read that you love it because it is who you are. Does anybody feel like sharing a time where maybe some of this kind of worked for them? Like maybe you went with your gut instinct and it panned out. Maybe you did something that was a little scary or a little offbeat and it worked out. Keep it G-rated.
I'll share.
Yeah.
If you want. So back in 2001, there was this process that we used to take a website and raise it to the top of the search engines. It's now called search engine optimization.
Mm-hmm.
In 2001, we did not have a name for it. I actually had direct numbers to people at Google and places like that because that's how we did it. We actually talked to these people that you don't now. So by 2006, we had a name for it, and people were starting to kind of get on board to some degree. And I went to a class to learn search engine optimization and didn't realize that I actually already knew it. Better than they knew it, but anyway. But they had a license program. So I went home and I decided that the license was $20,000. And in 2006, that felt like even more money than it feels like today. And I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. If any of you know much about Albuquerque, New Mexico, it is not the economic engine of America. And so when I bought my license, you buy it by an area. And so I followed my gut and I said, let's bring in Phoenix. So I brought in Arizona and New Mexico so I would have enough people.
Yeah.
And I paid that $20,000 that I did not have. At this point in time in life, I was a single stay-at-home mom and running my own business with a relatively troubled teenager in my home. But I just wanted to do it. I just thought, man, people need to know how to do this. And it was a super black box back then for people. Mm-hmm. And everybody told me, there's no way you're going to get people in Albuquerque, New Mexico to spend $1,800 for a class. And I did. I was doing pretty well. I did my 6 figures, and I ran it for a couple of years in 2 different states, and every other month it was the other state. And it was a lot of fun.
That's fantastic.
Whereas if I would have had, like you're talking about, some of the mindsets of, well, people don't spend that kind of money here and stuff like
Yeah.
that, then I wouldn't have ever done it. I wouldn't have had that
Right.
experience.
But you knew in your gut that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And even if it didn't work out, you would know, I still did it. I would have been more unhappy if I hadn't even tried.
I paid the $20,000 off in 4 months.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Do we need to say 11? It might.
You have a minute.
You still get time.
11:30. Okay. Oh my goodness. You know what's funny is I cut so much content out because I thought it was too much content. Apologize. But I'm good. We finish early.
If anybody's got any other questions,
Yeah.
we still have time, so. Or if you want a more private section, we can.
Yeah, we can do stuff outside. Oh,
Yeah.
and I will make this announcement. Next week is International Coaching Week. And I will be doing different pop-up shops around town. I'll be doing some here at T-Werx where the time is to be determined because Michelle is busy. And I don't want to bother her until she's come to the surface of the Small Business Festival. So I'll be doing stuff around town. And so go online and look up the International Coaching Week, and it'll tell you some of the things that are going on around town. So if you've never experienced coaching at all, and you just like to try it, there's pro bono stuff going on all over town. It's a lot of fun. So anyway,
Very good.
thank you. Thank you.
She is a fellow Toastmaster from T-Werx Toastmasters, so thank you all for coming out. Our next session will be on PowerPoints. That'll begin at 11:30. Michelle?
Oh, I'm
Next
sorry.
one is when? 11:30?
No, this ends at 11:30. The next
Okay.
one starts at noon.
All right, starts at noon. Okay. So we've got our next session will be on PowerPoints. So if you want to energize, fire up, make your PowerPoints better, get yourself out of PowerPoint, where, 18 double hockey sticks. Get in here, make sure you see that. Thank you all for coming out. If you are sitting around here for a while, or if you're going to be around here for a while, feel free to co-work out in the main area. We can give you the access code. It's right up there to get onto the internet. Enjoy yourselves. This is your place this week. Thank you very much.